So in this video, we're going to be finding out exactly why Homelander, the immensely superpowered psychopath, can't kill Stan Edgar, the corporate juggernaut. The Boys is absolute eye candy and possibly the best iteration of superhero fiction we've seen in the past decade. Besides Infinity War, of course, that would be Blasphemy. Anyway, it's a really good show because it has pretty much everything that qualifies for being a great show. Intriguing characters, nuanced plot, breathtaking action, and spine-chilling tension. It also has its fair share of themes, political and social messaging that's generated discourse on the internet. It's also got people talking about the struggles, motivations, and dynamics with the characters, and there are a lot of them. But while I acknowledged all the loose threads that were intentionally left loose for us, the audience, to tie ourselves, and all the conversations of the problems that plague the capitalist world, I mostly just have a minute lasting thought on these conversations, and that's pretty much the end of it. I'm much more interested in the action and the progression of the plot. However, there was one thing that just made me keep biting at my fingernails. It was a disturbing question that I just couldn't let go of, despite my best efforts. And that question is, why isn't Stan Edgar afraid of Homelander, whereas everyone else is terrified of him, and rightly so. This is not someone who is not bothered by killing his comrades in cold blood, and doesn't bat an eye when he basically murders a plane full of civilians. In short, he's a ruthless psychopath, and to not be afraid of him means you have to be pretty cuckoo yourself upstairs, like Butcher. Anyway, you probably understand why Butcher isn't scared of Homelander. It's really because he isn't scared of dying. He's willing to do anything to see Vought and Homelander destroyed, and he would gladly die to do that. What's the saying? If a man isn't afraid of death, he isn't afraid of anything. Okay, I made that up, but you get the point though. Anyway, that's Butcher. He's a psychopath himself, but Stan Edgar isn't. At least not obviously. Why then isn't he afraid of this absolute monster and is even bold enough to tell him he's bad product right to his face? It was just a really puzzling question that the show never really gave an answer to. So I went in search of the answer myself. I scoured Reddit and boy did I come across a truckload of opinions. Some of those opinions I agreed with, some of them not so much. Heck, someone even theorized that Stan was a soup himself, which wouldn't be that far-fetched, but clearly he's not a soup. I mean, does this guy look like a soup to you? And even if he was, I doubt it'd be anything that would remotely be a threat to Homelander, because we even see in the show that he needs humans to do his dirty work for him. And when she betrayed him, he very well could have retaliated to teach her a lesson and keep her in check. But he didn't, probably because he couldn't. And even if, for some absurd reason, he is a soup, we know he still can't beat Homelander because it's pretty much stated over and over again both by the writers of the comics and even within the show that Homelander is the strongest soup alive, much like Superman is the strongest man alive in DC. A lot of people were also saying Stan not being afraid of Homelander is all an act to make him think he's not afraid of him. Homelander would be worried that Stan had some kind of failsafe against him. And this point has two things I'm going to dissect and debunk. The first being that Stan Edgar couldn't possibly fake courage in front of Homelander. Homelander can literally hear his heartbeat. If he was afraid, he'd know in a second. So in his confrontation with Homelander, we know Stan wasn't really afraid of him at all. And the second thing I'm debunking is that Stan has some kind of failsafe against Homelander, which I also found to be false. Although in the comics there is a failsafe for in case Homelander goes all injustice, however that's in the comics. It's clear in the show that there is literally no failsafe for Homelander in case he goes rogue. And in fact, Vought just managed to come across a miracle failsafe in form of Homelander's son, which they then swiftly took action on and safeguarded him far away from Homelander's grasp. That is until Homelander eventually got him anyway. So it's not that Stan is faking courage, it's not that he has superpowers, and it's not that he has some kind of failsafe that he can just whip out faster than Homelander's heat vision could rip him clean in half. So what is it then? What makes this man so fearless in the face of literal scorching doom? Well, I dug deeper and I found it simple actually. In fact, this is Homelander's one true weakness. Now to answer this question, we have to go over Homelander's history for a bit. When we look at Homelander, we see a ravaging monster that kills mostly just cause he can, and he does it with a maniacal smile to boot. We also see a guy who gets a hard-on by a literal Nazi. However, what we don't see is a man who struggled with parental issues, just like the rest of us. We don't see a man who's ridden with loneliness because literally everyone he's ever met right from his childhood all the way to adulthood have all been lying to him every step of the way. The people that were supposed to be his pillars only ever performed psychologically draining experiments on him and used him to sell merch and movie tickets. He never got the chance to interact with anybody his age, much less form meaningful connections with them. The only people that acted as his parents drilled him with performance exercises and trained him to hone his powers. In the show, when we're introduced to Homelander, he has complete control of his powers, knowing and executing the precise level of heat that is required to simply heat a baby feeder, as well as rip an airplane in half with a single glance. This kind of expertise doesn't just happen overnight. These feats must have taken hours, months, and years of gruesome practice and exercises, most of which could not have been fun for a teenager. I'm sure every single social skill Homelander thinks he has, all the press conferences, talks, etc., were all taught to him by Vought. And we don't even have to speculate about this, it's something they actively do. With Starlight, her mom took her to several pageants and they had done several rehearsals just to prep her for a life of superstardom at Vought. At least she had a mother figure. Homelander had nothing but labs and test tubes, and the result? An egocentric megalomaniac monster. But how does any of this have anything to do with Stan Edgar? Well, everything. Think about it. The very company that practically created Homelander is run by Stan. And this is a big deal for so many reasons, many of which I'm sure you're already familiar with. Without Stan, Homelander would never have been born. Everything that happens at Vought has to be greenlit by Stan. Everything including Homelander. If Homelander needs a haircut, be sure Stan has to be aware. If Homelander is going out for the occasional visit to the dentist, Stan's aware of that as well. He's this ever-looming presence over Homelander's life that has been there since the beginning of his life. And guess what? Homelander is afraid of him. I can imagine Stan visiting Homelander occasionally in his lab, and Homelander feeling a bit insecure and worried that he hasn't lived up to the standards Stan has set for him. Standards which, by the way, are really high. Now, to fully understand the dynamics between Stan and Homelander, we have to first examine his dynamics with Madeline Stewell, Stormfront, and Ashley. Now, his relationship with Madeline was very interesting, to say the least, and it was one of the things that piqued my interest early on in the show. We know that he's very possessive with Madeline to the point where he doesn't even want her to pay attention to her own child. He wants her total and undiluted attention. And this is obviously horrible for a number of reasons, including A, the baby was always in danger of being lasered to a crisp. Now, what caused this toxic relationship to fester between them both? Well, it's simple and a bit weird. Okay, really weird. The thing is, Homelander sees Madeline as a parental figure, and this is because throughout his childhood he had no one to open up to. No one whom he could cry on their shoulder when he fell down. So when he grew up, he desired those things and sought them as an adult. And that's where his obsession with Stillwell started. She was perfect, what he had been longing for. And that's why he couldn't stop at just making her his mother figure. He took it one step further and made her his lover. And that's where this weird swallow your own vomit relationship really starts. But that's not where I'm driving at. You see, despite the relationship being obviously terrifying, it did serve a good purpose. And what is that purpose? Well, it kept Homelander in check, for a while at least. Madeline was very aware of Homelander's mental weakness, and she utilized that knowledge. That's why she could easily quell him whenever he was enraged. She could make him do things, she could manipulate him, and even though he was a ticking time bomb, she still had some level of control over him. That is, until he lasered her eyes off. With Stormfront, the dynamic was a bit different. It was more a lover type relationship. That said, it still has the same effect. She can make him do things that he normally wouldn't do. She could push the right buttons and essentially bend him to her will without him even realizing it. Homelander had no need for a Nazi superhuman army, but he went along with her anyway. Why? Because he obviously loved the fact that she made him more loved and she validated all the varying shapes and sizes of his toxicity. And just to be clear, I see many people online say that Homelander was into Stormfront because she was quote unquote tough, maybe even tougher than him. And I'm just gonna go ahead and call that BS. Stormfront was nowhere near as powerful as Homelander. He could have easily killed her just as easily he killed any other soup. And I know this because it took just the collective effort of Starlight, Kimiko, and Maeve to bully Stormfront and basically make her run away and cry like a little girl. Plus, if you hadn't noticed, it took one blast from Homelander's very inexperienced, far less powerful son to turn her into roast turkey. So my point is this: if Homelander could easily have killed Stormfront at any time, then why didn't he, despite his goals not aligning with hers? And why was he so fixated on her even after she'd been turned to a giant roast turkey? Well, the answer to that question answers this whole video. If you take a look at the dynamic between Homelander and Stan, not once did Homelander talk down on him or even disrespect him. And that's because despite Homelander's extremely powerful status in Vought, and frankly the whole world, he still believes he's a failure. He knows deep down beneath all that charm and power and smug, he's a deranged monster that nobody wants. So how does he compensate for this? Be the best he possibly can be. It's not that he always wants to be perfect, he has to. Homelander is a special type of narcissist. He's a vulnerable narcissist. Despite himself, he cannot stand catching his hair out of place because he has to be perfect all the time. And everyone has to acknowledge that, especially his pseudo-dad, Stan Edgar. Now, I know you might be wondering at this point, if that's the case, then what's the difference between Madeline and Stan? If Homelander could kill Madeline, what's stopping him from passing two Y-shaped plasma beams right through Stan? It's a valid question, and that's why I had to explain the dynamics between Homelander and Madeline. It's a different dynamic between him and Stan. He sees Stan as a father figure who, by the way, is not afraid of him in the slightest, as we've already talked about. This alone already makes him so much different from Madeline, who herself admitted she'd always been terrified of him. Homelander has a special bias to people who aren't afraid of him, as we see with his few encounters with Butcher. So now that we know all this, we've found out that Stan Edgar is the father figure to Homelander, who is A. Not afraid of him, B. Thinks little of him, and C. Never really appreciates him despite his best efforts. This right here is Homelander's kryptonite. With Stan Edgar possessing all this in his arsenal, Homelander would be mentally unable to kill him. It's not a physical restraint, it's a mental one. One that I'm sure Stan Edgar worked intentionally to put in place. But hey, what do I know? I could be wrong, but I'm more likely right. I want to know your thoughts on this as well. Why do you think Homelander couldn't kill Stan? Let me know in the comments, let's start a conversation. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, it really helps the channel. And subscribe if you want more content like this. Plus, you get a free cookie delivered to you through Vought International. Okay, I'm joking, I have no affiliation with that company, dear God. Anyway, thanks for watching, bye!